Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I am here to talk to you about classics. So, classics are something I have been trying to get more into. I did not read a lot of them in high school. I got to college and a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I've read this, I've read that, and I realized that I had not read hardly any of them. I remember in high school reading Of Mice and Men, A Separate Peace, To Kill a Mockingbird, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. That's it. Those are the only four that I remember. I'm sure we read a few more, but I do not have a lot of classics that I've read. And so part of me as a reader wants to have those on my list. If I want to be this well-rounded reader, I want to be able to say that I've read, kind of those most notable classics. And I think one of my issues is I never really know what classics really means. Like some books I know for sure are classic. And then other books I'm like, I think maybe, or maybe this is one I just haven't heard of. Part of it is just the definition. It is kind of dependent on the person. It could be just any old book. It could be any book written before a certain time. I've heard some people say classics are any book written before 1980. Some people think that they're the notable books, the books that stick around or really made an impact or even changed a genre or led a genre in a certain direction. And so I feel like just the definition itself is so dependent on the reader. When I first decided I want to really start reading more classics, I found a list of just a random one, 200 books that every person should read. And so I was like, yep, this is it. I'll start here. The farther I get in, the more I realized that this list was definitely biased to whoever wrote it because they had a lot of some specific authors on it. So I kind of took a few books out here, there, and added some in. But if you're watching this and you know of a classic I need to put on my list, please let me know because this is an area where I could use some guidance from the booktube community. I thought I'd start by telling you some of the classics I've read recently. And to be fair, classics is not my favorite genre. I have yet to find one that I'm really like in love with. Like most of them are 2 to 4 star ratings, 2 to 3 really. There have been very few 4-star classics and no 5-star classics. I haven't found one that I've just fallen in love with. So some of the ones I've read are like The Alchemist. I've read Anna Karenina, which I enjoyed, but man, is that dense. And like if you took out some of the fluff, like I really like the plot and then it switched to like 5 pages on farming and that brought it down for me. Some of the classics that I do enjoy, they're just so dense and they're mixed in with so much extra stuff that I don't enjoy that I just can't ever really fall in love with them the way I'm hoping to. So Anna Karenina, The Alchemist, I've read Animal Farm, I've read 1984 recently, and so I've had a few of those that I enjoyed. I did not enjoy 1984, and I think that may be because I read it in this time where fake news is like a pretty prevalent issue, and so it was almost just like too much for me. Like it was too relatable and it made me cringe. And I didn't enjoy the ending. Like I want a happy ending. I know not everything's gonna end up perfectly well, but especially with a story like that where like I can relate, I want a happy ending. And yeah. So I respect it. Couldn't get into that one the way I wanted to. So some of the ones I've read so far, Dante's Inferno, which I enjoyed, but I realized how hard it was to read this style without a group of people there with you. Like the last time I read anything like this where it was just written so differently and then you had to kind of dissect each line was with a class and a teacher that could lead me through that discussion. Trying to read this without anybody to talk to was very difficult for me. Thankfully, this edition came with like little notes. Thankfully, this edition came with some endnotes that helped me kind of dissect what I was reading, but it was very difficult to flip back and forth. That being said, this is on the higher end of the classics that I've read so far. I've also read Far from the Maddening Crowd. This is one that I'm not even sure if it is a classic. Like, is this considered a classic? I don't know. Let me know. But I liked it. I didn't love it. I think I gave it 3 stars. Like, it was a good story, but I wanted more. I enjoyed it. I liked the ending, but it was a struggle for me to get through it. There was a lot of times where I just found myself either bored or not really that invested. I did recently just read Alice in Wonderland, which was enjoyable, and I have this huge annotated version, which I learned a few things. It has incredibly beautiful artwork to go along with it, along with notes about Lewis Carroll and like his writing style, his life at the time, who it could be related to. I've always loved Alice in Wonderland. It's never been high up on my list of like older fairy tale kind of stories. I got to read some of the others, the different parts of it, and so that was new for me and really enjoyable to kind of see how it compares to the story that I've been told. One of my least favorite classics that I've read so far, Wuthering Heights. This just hurt me. I don't even know what to say. It's been a while since I read it. I read it probably 2 years ago. And so I don't remember much aside being left with the feeling that it was a dark, depressing story. I just didn't find enjoyable. Like, sometimes I don't mind a dark story. If I'm in the mood for it, all about that. But these characters I just couldn't love. And like, I'd heard such great things, I think, and like, oh, Heathcliff, like you're gonna absolutely fall head over heels for this guy. And I didn't like him at all. And like the way it ended, I don't know. I just didn't enjoy it. I was expecting to like this one, and I did not. The biggest book that I just finished as far as classics, Atlas Shrugged by Anne Ryan. This book took up the majority of the beginning of this year. I think I was reading it from January to March, and I have quite a library fine on it because they give you like 2 weeks before you have to renew it, and you can renew like 3 times. I don't know who can read this book in 6 weeks. I couldn't. And then now, I can't return it, so we'll see how big that fine is. I enjoyed this book overall. It was one of the ones I gave a 4-star. I felt like every time I was reading it, I got into the story. I really loved the characters. Dagny was amazing in my mind. I didn't like where the romance went. I shipped her with Hank. I don't know if shipping is a thing with Atlas Shrugged, but yeah. The politics of it, because there is a lot of political monologues, sometimes I could get into them. Sometimes they drove me crazy, and I found myself having to either reread or realizing that I just skimmed over the last few pages. And I think the worst thing about this book is that it's, about 1,000, a little over 1,000 pages. You get to the end and realize that 50 of the last 100 pages are this huge political monologue. And you've just gotten through this. You can see the finish line, and then they're like, oh wait, one last obstacle, you gotta read all of this. Like, if it was a 1 or 2 page monologue, fair enough, but getting to the end of this and realizing I had to go through 50 pages of Galt talking about his reasonings and his ideology, it took me like 5 days because I would read a few pages at a time and get so burnt out, and it didn't make sense. There were some phrases that were so confusing, some paragraphs to me that were so confusing that I don't even think I understood what it was trying to say. So this is towards the beginning of this monologue, but it's page 929, so you've made it through this huge chunk of the book, and now you gotta go through this. Let me read this to you. If nothing exists, there can be no consciousness. A consciousness with nothing to be conscious of is a contradiction in terms. A consciousness conscious of nothing but itself is a contradiction in terms. Before it can identify itself as a consciousness, it had to be a conscious of something. If that which you claim to perceive does not exist, what you possess is not consciousness. 50 pages of that. Drove me crazy. Overall, liked the book. Those last little pages and just the overall political, which I know is like the point of this book, right? But how in your face it is drove me crazy. I don't do well with like the political stuff, and I think that is part of my issue with classics. They became notable because of their political stance or their ideology or the reflection that they were asking the audience to consider, and I just want a good story. Like I said, I have a lot more classics that I want to try and get through, and even the ones I haven't enjoyed or fell in love with, I've been glad that I've read them. First of all, I want to be able to talk about them and give my opinion on them, and second, I want to be a diverse reader. So, some of the other classics that I have on my shelf, and like I said, I have a lot to get to, but I do have The Three Musketeers. It is thick, and I don't know if this one has, nope, no endnotes. This is just a thick boy. Oh, it has a few. Oh, and questions. Okay, so Three Musketeers. I also have Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, which I'm really excited for. I have not seen whatever that movie was that came out about this, but this is one I feel like I might really enjoy. Fingers crossed. I have Dracula by Bram Stoker. I mean, how can you not have this in a list of classics? So, of course, interested to get to this one. Heard good things. And I do have this really old set of, I don't know if you can see, William Shakespeare's collection. And this is like a genuinely old copy. 1937 this book came out. And so I probably won't read from this because I don't want it, it's kind of falling apart. I do want to read more Shakespeare. Actually, I don't know. I don't know if I want to read more Shakespeare. I'm hesitant and nervous, and I feel like trying to read it on my own. The last time I read it was in high school. Trying to read it on my own is going to be a beast. And I doubt there's anybody out here who wants to buddy read Shakespeare. If there is, please let me know. But yeah, again, it's something I want to have under my belt. I enjoy finding those, what I would consider classics, and sharing them with my students when I have the chance. Some of the ones I have in my library, The Giver by Lois Lowry. Such a good book. I heard the movie was not great. I tend, if I really love a book, to not even watch the movie because I don't want it to change how I've pictured things or the character that I have in my head. And this is one that I heard wasn't that great, and so I didn't watch the movie because I love the book so much. This, however, James and the Giant Peach, Tim Burton, I love that movie. I love the book, but the movie was so just as grotesque and dark and eerie, and like this little caterpillar guy is almost the exact same in the movie, and that's astounding. So I thoroughly enjoyed both the movie and the book, and I definitely consider it a classic. I don't know if you guys read The Indian in the Cupboard as a kid, but this is one that for me just seems like, who hasn't? You know, I would guess more people have than haven't, but I don't know if this is still something people read, because I teach second grade, so all of these are higher than I would read to my students right now. I'm wondering if this is still something that's read, or if it's either gone out of style or now is like too controversial. I don't know, but I remember loving the idea, like having these little toys that came to life and the dynamic between them. It did such a good job of like portraying those two little characters that you truly fell in love with them and like their adventures in just a normal house, being as how small they are. I loved this one. I reread it a lot as a kid. And then this next one, I don't know if it's a classic, but I feel like it should be. Did y'all ever read Frindle by Andrew Clemente? This book was one of the ones that I could easily say I read and read and read again as a kid. I thought it was hilarious. It made me want to come up with my own word for something and get it added to the dictionary, and I used to just spend some time doing that. My poor copy, a kid got to it. This is a hazard of having a classroom library, which is why usually the books that go into my library don't come back, unfortunately. But this is one I would consider a classic, or it will be. But let me know what you think. I don't know how many people read this book. You know what I mean? Like, did you all read this? Is this a popular book, or am I just remembering it because everybody in my school read it and it was part of my childhood, and so it seemed like a big deal? I feel like it was a big deal. And the last book I'm going to mention, which is not a classic, but a fun portrayal of a classic, and I need more of this in my life, is Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. Like, if we could have more adaptations like this, where we just make it ridiculous, but also very enjoyable to read, I would love it. Like, maybe throw some of that into Wuthering Heights, and I'd be on board, you know? I don't know.